even people, especially in their 40s, are like, oh, dude, I can't keep going with this. I'm like, no, it's okay. It's hard here because you're at that point where you're raising children, and perhaps you're worried about your own parents, and you're working hard, and then you've achieved some success, and then you're like, do I really want this after all? And that's what people think is a midlife crisis, but it's really just a change in values where you're ready to become the next version of you. And it gets good. It really does.
Welcome to It Gets Late Early. Today, I have a very special guest with me. I have Brian Clough of Longevity Gains, which is a Substack newsletter all about the importance of older consumers in this economy. He is also a multiple digital entrepreneur, and he also is a content marketing pioneer of sorts. Would you say that nails it, Brian? Did I get that right?
Yeah, I took a lot of arrows.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, I'm really happy to have you here. And I've also had the pleasure of being on your wonderful podcast, Longevity Gains. And I think what you have to say is really critically important for our audience. And it is really all around the power of the older consumer. So what is the longevity economy?
Well, that's a term that was coined by Joseph Coughlin over at MIT's Age Lab. And it was a book that I read in 2018. And this was right after I had sold my software company. And I was like, what am I going to do next? I'm certainly not going to retire. And it was really eye-opening because, number one, you have this huge demographic shift where our society is aging even as birth rates are just dropping off the cliff. So we have many more older people, and this is a trend that will continue the entire century at least, while we have fewer young people. And this has all these ramifications for the job market, for how we're going to pay to support people who need help when they're older. Most of us will be working longer. A lot of us want that, which is a good sign because, you know, my own Generation X, we've gotten the shaft like the entire way, and now we can't retire. So it's a good thing we have a good attitude about it.
I'm pretty sure the millennials and Gen Z are very
I know.
Same realm. So we're all in it together, Brian.
I'm with the millennials, but there's so many of you. You don't need my help, okay?
We have collective power.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. So, but you yourself, you were in a position, so you're Gen X, you were in a position, you sold your software business. Congratulations. You're also one of us, the tech employee community. And you were like, I'm not done yet. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I read the book, and, as an entrepreneur who, I told myself I was going to take at least a year off, and I made it 7 months, and I thought that was pretty good. But I traveled a lot, and I knew that in my future, I wanted travel to be a big part of that, but I also wanted to continue working. I wanted to focus more on just writing and continuing to publish newsletters, what have you. And that's when I realized I was interested in my own generation, ignored as we are, but also because we're at this pivot point. The baby boomers are the bedrock of the longevity economy right now because they have so much money relative to the rest of us. And yet marketers, advertisers, brands are ignoring this generation that they literally paid attention to since they were kids, right? I mean, the creation of youth culture happened because the baby boomer generation was so large. So you have these people who have all this money, they've been catered to their entire lives, and now they're over here going, hello, I would like to spend some money. And yet we have, as you well know, an casually ageist culture.
Casually ageist and accepted ageist culture.
Right. And it doesn't make any sense. I mean, One thing that marketers and entrepreneurs usually can get over anything if there is enough money involved. Here we have exceptional amounts of wealth in the baby boomer generation. That's half the equation. The other half is we're living longer, we're living healthier. The longevity industry, trying to reverse aging and help people keep going for even longer, means that we're going to have to work longer. The average 5-year-old today will live to be 100 and will generally be in great health. So we're seeing it's just a massive shift. And when I talk about it, a lot of people are like, okay, that's fascinating. I didn't understand that, but that's the future. And I'm like, no, it's happening right now. Gen X will not retire in their mid 60s. That's the component where you keep working, you keep spending, therefore you don't become irrelevant in the eyes of consumer or companies and or society, hopefully. So it's all happening right now. But as you well know firsthand, we have to fight against the way it is. It's a transitional period, and transitional periods are always rough. It's like we're in a labor shortage, and yet they don't want to hire people my age, or in the tech industry, people your age. And that's
Exactly.
ridiculous.
It's insanity. It's insanity. And to your earlier point, it strikes me as so bizarre in the sense that we usually abide by the almighty dollar. That's what drives everything. And these organizations, they know that all this collective bargaining, all this actual cash is sitting at the top with Gen X and the boomers. And it's like, how on earth are they ignoring these two generations that actually have so much more buying power than the younger ones? I mean, there are articles all the time about how Gen Z and millennials can't buy homes, how the rents have skyrocketed, how everyone's feeling behind. And yet all the marketers are focused on these people who have very little, discretionary income in comparison to those older generations.
And there's an answer for that, because the other ageist industry other than tech is the advertising industry. And they are just, again, this focus on youth culture. There's a rush in agencies and otherwise to hire young people who have really no ability, and this is not a slight, to empathize with what it's like to be older, number one. And number two, because of our casually and accepted ageist society, they think it's a bad thing, right?
Yep.
But if you look at the data about where the misconceptions about older consumers come from, it's from marketers under the age of 35.
Wow.
And so until both tech and advertising can say, I think we need a little bit more seasoned, experienced advice here to understand what's happening, this is going to continue. And you're right. Usually the dollar bills, y'all, will, fix everything. But in this case, it's
All about
almost
the money.
willful ignorance. But I see it changing in the last year, since both of us have been working on these projects.
It's definitely thanks to us,
I think it is. No, but there's been a very big shift in mainstream awareness about ageism across the board, about the economic power of older people, about how valuable older people are as workers, despite the stereotypes. And, Gen Z's not hurting. They rightfully want better working conditions. And we're over here going, we'll do anything. Just give us a chance.
Right. And there's actually so much that is similar between the generations. Like, it's not as though what Gen Z wants is not what the baby boomers want.
No,
right?
It's
like
true.
They want flexibility. They need it. They need it for different reasons. Like Gen Z's out there living their best life, right? And good on them. Whereas the baby boomers are maybe taking care of older parents or hanging out with their grandkids or whatever it might be, exploring other interests. Like, flexibility is good for literally everybody. So it's we're not all that dissimilar, right? And so a lot of this generational warring is just, it's pathetic, but it gets clicks.
It's silly.
Right?
We all do want similar things, and you're seeing, I think we're witness to a big shift in the way the job market's going to work going forward. But it means everyone needs to participate, because otherwise there's just not enough people. Now, it remains to be seen what the effect of AI is. A lot of people think AI will most take out middle management. Unfortunately, that's millennials at this point. But
Because we were supposed to keep climbing, man. Brian, we were
exactly. And
sold
then
the
everyone ahead of
ambition.
you
Yeah,
isn't moving out.
exactly. It's like, wait a minute. Yeah, it's so true. It's really kind of a bum deal. But everyone has something, pros and cons to every age, every single stage. Like, this is just kind of life, right? But you mentioned that there has felt to be this somewhat of a shift over the last few years, and I would say, I only became super hyper fixated on this as it impacted me. Much to your point, like if you don't have people experiencing the same things as your customer base or as your employees, like it's really hard to relate to others, right? So, case in point, I was called out for being, quote, old at, 37, looked around and was like, holy crap, it's actually kind of true at these tech companies. But, I got to this point where I started wondering, like, what's next? And it sounds to me like you also have felt over the last, and like I said, I only became aware of it somewhat recently, but it has seemed to me, and certainly I'm on the lookout for these things, that there is a lot more media coverage. There are a lot more even older celebrities, for example, talking about ageism in society and age bias that they've faced in their own industries. And I kind of have to tip my hat a little bit to the people who are up there and, have the opportunity with the platforms that they do to start talking about this stuff so that it can trickle down to the everyman like you and me, right? But I'm wondering if you have seen other sorts of shifts or other sorts of signs and what those were and why you think they're happening specifically now. Is it, that we're about to have this wealth transfer? What got us to be a little bit awakened on this subject, would you say?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, like I said, Coughlin's book came out in 2017, which laid out, it's not like, oh, that's interesting. It's like, this is a monumental shift that everyone's got
Big
to pay
deal.
attention to. I read it in 2018. I started my project Further, which is a different newsletter specifically aimed at Generation
Wow.
X and midlife. But it felt like I was kind of just speaking into the wind, other than my own audience of people my age who were like, yeah, that's exactly my experience as well. But then once I started Longevity Gains and started talking to other marketers and entrepreneurs, at first people were, well, that's interesting. Why would you be focusing on that though? And then that only 6 to 8 months ago, I noticed, for example, the New York Times editorial board just came out and said, this is probably one of the biggest things we should be talking about here, the aging of the population and all the attendant issues. And so week after week after week, and, I had to check my confirmation bias because I know I pay attention to this more than
Yeah,
others. But a few
totally.
years ago, you couldn't even get in a filter bubble about this. I mean,
Right.
people weren't talking about it. Now we
Yeah.
have a whole army of anti-ageism activists that I
Yep.
love. I mean, they are
Yeah,
kicking so much ass.
they
Um,
are.
but again, it will come down to the economic issues because if the spending, there have been multiple reports also within the last 6 months, like when the Wall Street Journal comes out and says, we'd be in a recession if it weren't for baby boomers spending money. And
Yeah.
everyone's like, oh,
Oh,
but I thought it was Gen Z. Baby boomers spend 15 times more than Gen Z. It's not
15x.
even close. And
Wow.
yet, what are all the ads, focused on?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we're in a transitional period. It's happening. It'll be rocky, but it's encouraging. It's certainly better than the alternative of continue to be ignored.
Yes, absolutely. Question for you. Do you think that there's some element of marketers, I mean, if they're being this thoughtful about it, if they're not just, as you said, sort of latent ageists, as most people are, what, at least 1 in 2, I think the WHO said people have negative associations with aging. But is there a sense maybe among marketers that because there's about to be this, and it's not exactly right now, but because there's about to be this wealth transfer in I think it was the trillions of massive amounts of money I can't even conceive of that's going to be passed down from the baby boomers when they pass on to the next generation. Do you think that that might come into play for the way people are just kind of willfully ignoring the older consumers?
Well, there's two aspects to that. And it's a good point. I don't think you can really ignore that. I think most of that wealth would be passed down to millennials but with a lot of people that are people who are more educated and sometimes higher income tend to live longer and healthier lives than most
Strong
people.
point.
So a lot of that wealth is, number one, it's not going to come until you guys are 50 somethings yourselves. Number two, there's this die with zero movement where the boomers are just like, screw
I've
this,
heard
man.
about
Yeah, I know. So of course,
yachts.
we're
Yachts for
spending
everyone.
your inheritance.
I think wasn't that in Seinfeld? Didn't that happen to George Costanza? Didn't
I
his
don't
parents be
remember
like,
that one, but
"Oh
it
my
wouldn't
gosh"?
surprise me.
I think I remember that. I gotta go. Best show ever. Anyway, not even close. Friends versus Seinfeld. We're not going to go down that path. That'd be a whole podcast episode. But anyway, I think that did happen to George. I'm going to revisit that. But yeah, no, I mean, it's a huge. You're absolutely right. There's still a lot of runway left for a lot of
But
these
I
people.
think the more important point beyond wealth transfer is that rich people are always going to be, wealthy, and there's going to be exceptions for that. But the baby boomers are the last generation where your average person can comfortably retire. And that's really kind of what's ending. So will some millennials have the ability to retire because their parents didn't spend all their money? Absolutely. But you got to look at things from the big picture standpoint. And the general trend will be you guys will most likely follow in our footsteps and continue working longer, because regardless of how much money you have, 35 years of retirement is a very long time not to work.
Time.
When Social Security was promulgated, most people died 3 years before you were eligible for benefits at 62.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah, now we're living 95
awful.
or 100. And
oh my gosh,
the concept doesn't work when it becomes decades, right? And that's what we're going to have to adapt to.
Yeah, we have to get ready to be welcoming people into their golden years, right? And I think it's going to, on the flip side, actually make people live longer, right? Because when you're in a community, you're using your brain, you're being active, you're around others, like that makes you persist longer. And there's so much loneliness in this country and the world, I think obviously exacerbated greatly by the COVID pandemic, but it's something that if we can shift that, we can only expect longevity to increase. So, I mean, I think it's so imperative. And obviously both of you and I wouldn't have the things that we have going on in play if we didn't believe that. But there have to be, I would imagine, some companies out there that are doing this well. Like, do you have any examples for the audience of companies that you think are actually hitting the mark when it comes to attracting and retaining customers, say over 50?
Well, it's
besides if I fall, I can't get up, like the thing around your neck, like the things that are like,
No. And that's, we could have a whole conversation about how that kind of inadequacy marketing doesn't work. I mean, it's a famous catchphrase because it was so cringy, but
it's real bad.
It's not a very successful company. It's like a, small time, like the first people who made Life Alert went bankrupt. And then another company took it over. It's like a niche direct marketing thing. You know who the biggest provider of fall detection hardware is in the world? Apple, the Apple Watch, right?
My phone.
And older consumers are one of the larger customer segments of Apple because they make cool stuff that does things we may need, right? Now, that's a different thing from saying you're frail, you're weak, you're over the hill. Gee, I don't know why that doesn't work so well, but it's also, increasingly like, it's just so funny to see how people are going to treat Generation X when we're in our 60s. I'm like we listen to Nine Inch Nails. I mean, do you really think you're going to get us with this sappy ass marketing? I mean, that's just not going to work.
But you need to employ a Gen Xer to be able to tell you that, right? It's like that's the importance of an intergenerational workforce. Like, you need people along every single age and stage of life to be able to share what their experience is and what would attract them or repel them, right? So
Yeah. So to answer your
there you go.
question though, so there's this eyewear startup called Caddis that
Yes,
is
killing it.
specifically, they do a really good job of presenting aging in a positive light and appealing to people seeing older faces on their website and stuff like that. The interesting thing about this though, that Warby Parker, the millennial darling of eyewear, saw a huge bump in sales and adoption by older consumers. All they had to do was add progressive lenses because like
Mm.
older people want hip, cool frames too, but we
Like
have,
yours, by the way, Brian. They
well,
look
thank
good.
you. These are progressive, by the way, because,
There you go.
don't call them bifocals. But,
I would
so
never.
now you're seeing people who are like, yeah, this is too lucrative a segment to just let Warby Parker add a
Right.
feature to. If we speak to older consumers directly, we'll have better brand identification and all of that good
Yeah.
stuff. So it's happening. And that's a great example. You're seeing, again, last 6 months, L'Oreal has a new campaign featuring older women. It's badass
Yep.
because these are
Yep.
beautiful, beautiful people. And
Yep.
yeah, it's early days, and like I said, there will be bumps. I think our presidential election right now is a negative
Yeah.
influence.
Yeah.
Everything about age that is wrong with the conversation is being highlighted in that battle. So we're going to have
100%.
to get past that. But younger people are frustrated, but I don't think it's about age specifically. It just happens to be that in this context, we have very much elder people running the country, and people aren't happy with the country. Therefore, it's older people's fault,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So there's merit there, but it's the
Mhm.
wrong conversation. Unfortunately, we're going to have to get past it.
We are, but I think once again, it really underscores and drives home the point for me that what we need is intergenerational leadership across the board, whether that's in a private company or a public company or at the highest part of the government, right? Like we need people working together who bring their various backgrounds and experiences to the table and can have adequate representation for the public. And that when you look on its face at the presidential election specifically and who we believe will both be getting those nominations, it doesn't it falls a little flat on that front. But you're right, it's really open season on ageism when it comes to politics at this point, and it's I think it's a really big bummer for the movement of anti-ageism because we have these two particularly high profile people in power in play in this situation, and there are some things that are just being thrown about that some of them I honestly think are fair. Like I when people talk about President Biden's age and are concerned about his longevity, I'm like, yeah, I think he has a 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 chance of literally dying while he's in office. Like that's a
Yeah.
legitimate concern. I don't think that's ageist, that's realist. But other things get thrown in the mix that are really quite ageist, right? So there's a blend of it, but I just think it's we're making so much progress when it comes to changing the narrative. And every time I see another headline for politics, I'm like, damn it, we're taking a couple steps back.
Yeah. And it goes both ways because I talk about all the power that older people are going to have in our society going forward, economic and otherwise. And I point out over and over again, this is not an us against them. It is not
Right.
us against younger people. That is the worst possible solution. And
Completely agree.
some marketers will play that card, just like
Yeah.
red versus blue. And, I
100%.
mean, we don't need more division. We need intergenerational harmony if we're going to have any
Exactly.
chance of having a sane society going forward. So educate younger people to say, look, it's not cool to make fun of older people any more
We'll
than
be
it's
there
cool to
someday.
make fun of people based on race or
Exactly.
gender or anything else. And in this case, besides those other things where perhaps you don't look like another person, or you're not the same gender as another person, unless you're incredibly unlucky, you're going to be older.
Exactly.
So it should be
Exactly.
easier to have some empathy here. And yet it's the same as every other ism, Maureen.
Yep.
Fear. We're afraid
Yep.
to get older, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Terrified.
I don't think I was a 20 something going, man, I can't wait till I'm 56.
No, you
No, that
weren't.
never happened.
That did not happen. Although I will say, I look at my own parents and I'm like, your life looks so good right now. I mean, I think about getting older and where they are in the sweet spot of their lives, and then several other relatives that come to mind as well. And I'm like, that looks great, you know? And I think that's the other thing is the longevity of the human life now, the lifespan of humanity has lengthened so much, and we're healthier longer, and we're doing things that we want to be doing into our older years. And so to me, it's suddenly looking way better than it ever did before because I had all those ageist stereotypes embedded in my brain. There was a study that showed that kids as young as 4 years old actually have ageist stereotypes, harmful ageist stereotypes that they will spout off just unthinkingly. So we are doing this to ourselves. And so it's going to take a long time to get out of our own way here. And so I think any sort of move that we can make to get there, whether it's having these conversations, whether it's having even celebrities get out there and talk about this befalling them in their own private worlds that are very inaccessible to the most of us, but it's all going to help us get out of our own way, and I think it's all critical. So I think we do have a ways to go, but your point is super sound. We don't usually sit there and think, I can't wait till I'm older. That's not something
And the
that
hardest
happens.
thing for people to accept, and this is all research backed, is you're pretty unhappy during your 40s. So sorry about that,
Yeah,
Maureen.
I'm
But
happy now, but I'm like, ooh, is it gonna fall soon?
yeah, like
House
they
gonna come
even
tumbling down?
pinpointed at like 47.6 or something is like the
Yeah,
peak
I
of
heard that.
unhappy. And then you hit 50. And I'm telling you, I'm living proof you get happier. And the happiest decade of life is your 70s, and this just sounds so counterintuitive to younger
It
people,
does.
especially, but even people, especially in their 40s, are like, oh, dude, I can't keep going with this. I'm like, no, it's okay. It's hard here because you're at that point where you're raising children, and perhaps you're worried about your own parents, and you're working hard, and then you've achieved some success, and then you're like, do I really want this after all? And that's what people think is a midlife crisis, but
Yes.
it's really just a change in values where you're ready to become the next version of you, and it gets
I
good.
love
It
that.
really does.
I really love that. It's not a midlife crisis. I think Chip Conley refers to it as like the midlife chrysalis, like you're coming out as
Right.
who you
it's a
who
it's
you
a
really always
calling.
were, right?
It's a
Yeah.
calling, not a crisis. He put it that way, and
Yeah.
I thought that was
I
good.
Chip's awesome. He was one of the first people's books that I read. His book was one of the first books that I read when I was kind of jumping off into this maelstrom here. But
Yeah.
the yeah, his story just being placed into a young tech company next to Brian Chesky at Airbnb, and like showing him the wisdom of all of his experience in the hotel world was such a cool, compelling one, because it really showed the virtue of having an intergenerational mentorship and mentorship, as he called it, learning as much from the person who was decades younger than he
Yeah.
as he was teaching to that person. So I just
Well,
want to
that's
see
what
more
I love.
stories
It's
like
not
that.
some utopian fantasy. Intergenerational really makes everyone happier. It's
Yeah.
not, I was as idealistic as they come when I was younger. The internet will make us all smarter and get along with each other.
Oh, oh, how did that turn
Woo!
out?
Yeah.
Woohoo! Yeah.
Yeah. If it weren't for the
Amazing,
fact
isn't
that
it?
I owe my entire career to the internet, I'd be like, we should probably not do this.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Yeah, it's very counterintuitive. We have these supercomputers in our hands, and yet we're dumber than we've ever been. It's wild. It's a
Yes.
wild world. So, Brian, I want to get into a little bit more about what you see unfolding. Like, what are your thoughts about what's going to happen in the not too distant future when it comes specifically to marketing, and where do you think companies can go to get the sort of insights that they need to actually bring about the change that's really necessary for them to make more money. So what do you think about that?
It's kind of a multi-pronged thing. So number one, you'll see more and more companies go, we got to get this baby boomer money, right? I mean, it's just too obvious. It's just sitting there. And that's an easy one. And that's short term,
Yeah.
meaning 10, 15 years. The longer term trend is perpetual labor shortage that, again, the Wall Street Journal has talked about. So you're going to see employers, at first they think they're doing older people a favor until they realize that we really need these people. Older workers are highly dependable, seasoned, wise, can mentor younger workers in a very valuable way. So you'll see that trend coincide, thankfully, with many people my age who realize they're probably going to have to keep working because my generation, a good portion of it, more than half, doesn't have enough to retire on under traditional timeframes. And now when you add in extended life and health spans, there's no way that you have enough money to live for 35 years. You just don't.
Yeah.
So
Kind of
this
freaks
is
me
a
out,
happy
Brian.
congruence of people, employers need people to work, older people need to keep working. And then, of course, I have to be empathetic to people who have jobs because I haven't had one in 25 years, right?
You
So
sound
for
like you have a lot on
me,
your plate.
for
I
me,
feel
it's
like you
just
have plenty
like,
of jobs.
what do I want to do? It's not like I
Yeah.
have to ask for anyone to help me, and thankfully for that. But Generation X and people over the age of 45 in general are the most entrepreneurial group in creating successful businesses. So you're going to see a lot of that
Interesting.
too, right? So
Interesting, because you
you
also
was,
think of the entrepreneur and you
yeah,
typecast them
or
as the
just
20-year-old, right?
right. Oh God, the
But then,
stereotype of the millennial in a hoodie is
oh
Zuckerberg
my
and
God,
him alone. Really,
exactly.
when you look at the
Yeah.
statistics, yeah.
Yep.
Um,
And they're not the
so
most successful except for Zuckerberg. Yeah, I guess he was.
yeah, and don't get me started about him. That's
Yeah,
a
we don't
blight
have
of your
to.
generation.
My dear God, I know, I know.
But and beyond just the startup entrepreneur, you've got just freelancing, consulting. um the average age of a digital nomad is around 40, not because of 40-year-olds, but it's an average. You have young people and then you have older people because their kids have grown up and now they can go and do it. You guys are kind of stuck right now, but I would imagine later in life, you'll explore all these kind of options too. So it's an amazing time to be alive, although it feels like that Chinese curse, which is, may you live in interesting times. It's definitely interesting. And nothing is turning out the way you may have thought it was going to be.
That is
But
so
we
true.
have more ways to adapt and thrive than ever. And that's my general message, I guess.
Well, I think that's actually a really beautiful message, and I think it's one that I really, really want to hold on to with all my might because it's so easy to get dragged down by all the news headlines that are gloom and doom and all the layoffs in tech. I mean, it's a nightmare out there. It's like contagion, right? Like it's just one after another, and it's a hard time. I feel like to be just a rank and file employee. Like I was looking at this headline recently that it was in Bloomberg, and it was like, hey, how about work life balance? You achieve that by not having kids, and it's like, what are we all here for? Like, what are we striving towards?
I know,
And
and we need more kids.
we need kids. And I'm like, we have to sell people on having kids, or we're kind of, I mean, might be the best thing for climate change if we can keep the kids on the
I know. It's so
downturn. But
complicated.
it's wild, yes. But it's all interrelated.
Yeah, there's so many different sides to all these issues. Like, Scott Galloway and others have
I love
been
Scott Galloway.
big proponents of, young men are in a bad place and they're not
Yeah.
getting married and we're not having kids. And then someone will show up and go, climate change. But, it's just, there's so much room to say you're wrong without appreciating the nuance of all of these discussions.
Americans don't do nuance very well. Like
It's true,
it's a
especially
shame.
not in the comment section. Okay.
Oh
So
dear God, stay away from the comment section. Stay away. But this is the one subject that I think there's a perverse beauty in it because it's gonna get all of us, and it actually you can be ageist against younger people. I know that there was a study that came out recently that said there's no right age to be a woman leader. You're either too young or too old, right? And I'm
no,
sure that extends, right? It's crazy. So I
no,
mean, it absolutely
as
can
with all
happen, right?
things, anything that's, there's a downside to, women experience it harder. And it's just
It's true.
frustrating because, again, we're over here going, okay, we've tackled racism and sexism
Nope.
and
Nope.
genderism, and now we're on ageism. No, we didn't even fix the other
No.
things yet.
We are not anywhere near that. We are not anywhere near done with our work there. But I like to think that in a world of so much division, at least there's one thing. I actually usually hate to say the words, the phrase "at least," because typically it like basically downplays something else, and I don't intend for that to be the case. But
Right.
this is the one thing that gets all of us. So there's intersectionality that makes it infinitely worse if you're a person of color, if you're maybe not heterosexual, if you're a woman, etc. So, but this gets everybody. So I think it's a fun one in that regard because it's like we can fully unite here against it. So I'm glad that you and others that you mentioned out there are doing this kind of work and helping us move out of our own way and into hopefully a new period where we don't just basically discriminate against our future selves or our past selves, and we allow everybody to just live and flourish and grow, which, I mean, getting older has rocked. I've loved it. Apparently I'm about to start going on the downturn until 47 and a half or 47.6, but after that it's going to shoot back
Well,
up.
I think the issue that we're seeing with more people becoming aware of this is if you go into it with your eyes open, then you're probably going to be fine. But most people in their 40s are so busy, they just didn't see
Good
it.
point.
They didn't
Good
realize
point.
why I'm making more money than ever. I've got a great family. I've succeeded in my career. Why am I miserable? That's what hurts when you don't know why. But just keep the faith and realize you're going to make it through, and it's going to get better and better and better. And that's what's cool about getting older.
I love that. And I sincerely hope that advertising can catch up to that sentiment because like you said earlier, we need to see portrayals of people in their prime, like having a great life, flourishing after 50. And it can't be the I've fallen and I can't get up. Like that can't be the vibe. It has to be portrayed in a different light. And so that's why it's so great to see companies like Caddis out there doing the work they're doing. It's great to see Warby Parker picking up there and actually adding stuff that would be relevant to an older consumer. But I hope we can see, more, for example, female centric brands giving us not a 20-year. I love 20-year-olds. They're great. I was 20 once, but like I, as a 41-year-old woman, like I don't really care to see your makeup applied on an 18-year-old. That doesn't really do much for me. They already look perfect. Like their skin is glassy. Like I want to see brands that are focused on older people and doing it in a very respectful way that imbues everything with hope and optimism because that's what we have ahead of us. We have so much runway and so much life. So I'm really hopeful that brands are going to wake up to that. And if it might be driven by the almighty dollar, but we need the advertising to reflect what the reality is because as you said, the happiest people are in their 70s. Show me more happy 70-year-olds,
Yeah.
please.
And it's happening, again, but to the people out there who are entrepreneurially minded or already have a small business, this is the next big thing. And it's right there in front of you. Everyone's like, man, I wish I would have gotten in early on this. It's early.
It's
And
early. Yes.
do it.
Yes. I so agree. It's like we just have to push that stereotype away that makes us think that it's unsexy or uncool to think about being older, to appeal to older
And
people.
that's why
It's
older
not.
entrepreneurs are leading the charge because they're like,
Exactly.
I feel good. I can get behind this. It's a very mission-based thing. And
Yep.
so if the younger people don't think it's cool, that's okay. We'll be over here with all the money. that's all right.
I love that. We'll carve our own path. It'll be paved in literal gold. I'm here for it. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming, Brian. I think what you're doing is fantastic. And I can't wait to send more people your direction. Your newsletter is really, really wonderful. You're a great writer and a great thinker. And I appreciate you. So, where can people go learn more about you and all your 17,000 pursuits that you have?
Well, first of all, thank you, Maureen. That is very nice of you. Primarily longevitygains.com is the newsletter where we explore the now, emerging prominence of the longevity economy. Like I said, it's still early days, but I do a lot of, highlighting examples where I can, but mainly the message is this is happening right now. And in 5 years, it's not going to be too late because this is going to be the economy, but there's nothing like being early just right? Like 2 years ago
Right
may have
before you see
been,
the wave.
yeah, 2 years ago may have been too early, but it's not right now. And that's a
Yeah.
really important thing. If you are, maybe around the age of 50 or so, I also have a more consumer oriented newsletter called Further at further.net. And that basically explores, life at midlife, and is really kind of leaning into what does it look like when we don't retire at 65 or 67, like it looks like we're probably not going to. And the more important thing is, which we didn't get to touch on, but a lot of baby boomers have the money to retire and then they unretire because they have no
Yes.
purpose. They're bored. You can only play so much golf. So I'm telling Gen Xers, let's just plan not to retire and then
I love
make
it.
our lives, starting now, ideal instead of some fake idyllic retirement that's not really going to happen.
Love it. Love it. Well, I will put all of that information in the show notes so people can go find you. Again, Brian, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be in your orbit.
Thank you so much, Maureen.